Right. What we might do quickly is hear from CN through the project director NGN. Ladies and gentlemen, Commander Nick Watson.
Thank you, sir. Admiral Goldrick, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Nick Watson. I'm the Acting Director of NGN. I'm going to talk to you very quickly about why CN has issued an innovation statement. Who here has seen the innovation video that's been publicised? Okay, that's a good take-up so far. You'll see from that CN is very interested in innovation. The reason is not just Plan Polaris, which you know is very important, but also what comes after Plan Polaris. Navy is cutting steel on OPVs in 2018. We've never done it that quickly before. One of the things CN wants out of today is, in particular, comments on that in the feedback that is provided to him. So please make sure you go through the innovation statement, pull out the key messages, which are you are all responsible for innovation. Don't give up. There will be obstacles. If you read about the success stories in innovation in the world, people always get obstacles. Dyson, who invented the Dyson vacuum cleaner, came up with 43 different models to get to what he actually got to sell. It means you have to have stamina and you have to believe in what you think is important. CN wants you to think of innovation as a verb, not a noun, and I think the message from that is pretty obvious. But what he wants is a ground-up use of innovation. One thing we won't be talking about today is the Navy suggestion scheme. Who here has used the Navy suggestion scheme? Yeah, that's why we're not going to talk about it. We need to come up with better methods that use technology to make sure ideas get somewhere. That's something that Navy will be developing, and you'll see that mentioned in the innovation statement. So what CN wants is ground up. In a way, you need to come up with the idea on how innovation and ideas are handled. So please have a think about it. You'll see that innovation links very much to 3 Navy signature behaviours: challenge and innovate, drive decision-making down, and fix problems, take action. And you'll see that comes out in the themes in CN's statement. So what next for innovation after today? Well, as I said before, some of the messages out today will be communicated to the highest leadership of the Navy. But after that, we have a comm strategy on innovation. So you've seen the video, you've seen the statement. There's going to be a lot of good news stories on innovation published over the next few months on all Navy media means. If you've got some of your own, please send it to the email address you'll see on the statement to us. But the next big step is innovation seminars. We're going to pilot that on the 22nd of October at HMAS Penguin. At the end of today, I would like to get 10 volunteers from the audience who are available on that day to come and see me, and I'll give you a few more details. But we want to start these innovation seminars, and that's the first one, to test it, with the idea that by halfway through next year, every unit in the Navy will have someone who's done that seminar and will act as a facilitator for innovation. They'll get some skills, some very basic skills, on how to process innovation. So that's a first step. Obviously, we need to go a lot further than that. The next one is to get involved. If you've got ideas, and it's great that you all came today, but write that article for TAC Talks. Write that article for organisations like the ANI, or get involved with the ANI. There's ways to get your ideas out there. Please use them. I'll just finish on the topic that's being discussed at the moment. I've read a letter by a general in Britain talking about how he was continually writing reports to his leadership in his capital that stopped him doing his job. His name was Julius Caesar, and it was 2,000 years ago. So it's not a new problem, but I think, as you all accept, technology's probably made it worse for today. So on that note, I'll hand you over to your new moderator.
Thank you. As I mentioned, James will have to sneak off at, I think, at 3:45. So James, before you go, can you just accept this small gift? It's James Goldrick's new book, Before Jutland, and he's even signed it. Thank you very much.
His idea, not mine.
Okay, clearance diver Darren McDevitt, come up and take charge of round number 2 for admin burden, and also just very briefly, not for half an hour, about your clearance diving career. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'll talk about being a warfare officer as well as a clearance diver. Darren McDevitt, I work at the MCD Group. I joined the Navy in '96 as a sailor, changed over in 2000, did my warfare officer training. One of the highlights of that was getting the Canadian Exchange and doing my Phase 4 and consolidation in Canada. Then did a few jobs and went on MCDO course, very challenging, rewarding course. Completed that, did a number of jobs at Clearance Diving Team 1 and 100 class ships. Last job was to go to Clearance Diving Team 4 as the XO. While I was over there and before, I did my Master of Arts through UNSW in International Strategy and Security, and now I've moved back to Sydney and work at the MCD Group. I'm a Staff Officer at Mine Warfare. So it's Mine Warfare and Clearance Diving. A lot of people forget that, so I'm the Mine Warfare Officer. Thanks very much. So we'll start with, we're going to continue on with the admin burden. So I'll just go back to the audience for a number of questions or statements, and I'll try and to link those in with our panel. So, please.
Before the break, we heard a lot of issues identified with particular administrative areas, such as doubling up of WHS, OHS signals, or bandwidth limitations on particular pieces of kit. And I'd like the panel's thoughts on this as well in terms of how a way forward is identified. My question to people, to my colleagues in the room is, at what point did you identify a problem or an issue? At what point did you research the origin of it? For example, some MAT is grounded in legislation, some MAT is grounded in inquiries and reviews and mechanisms as a result of those. And at what point did you formulate any idea or solution forward and submit your case to let someone know that this is what you think? Or did you just say, that's FISO's problem, that's Defence People Group's problem, because I just want to go home and go to the beach now?
Before I ask the panel, has anyone got to answer that question in the audience? Can I ask from the panel, has anybody got any comment, please? Sir.
I think all of us have done that more than we should. We've seen the enemy and here's us. James?
Just to point I've been thinking about over the break, but we're talking about admin. Why is that important? I mean, we're sort of getting into some pretty nitty little details here. Well, it's important because of the point you heard before that the Navy is getting more technological, the way we fight is getting more technological. It's getting more bureaucratic. If you think about what Link 16 has done to the Navy, if you think about the fact that we're starting to talk about having federated capabilities between our Navy and other navies being dependent. You know, think about the fact that we had Cantabria here for a year. That's an example of a federated capability, and we're heading down that path, particularly with the US, but also others. We're talking about a more and more bureaucratic way of fighting. So, working out how to solve a really annoying administrative problem actually has a war-fighting consequence and has a war-fighting importance, because the skills you need, and Nam sort of talked about it just a little bit then, are the same. Tracking the origin of the problem, working out how important it is, working out who can make the decision, where is the node in the network that has sufficient power to communicate that there's a problem or solve the decision. These are all sort of problems of complex systems, complex bureaucracies, and that's kind of what Navy is becoming more and more. Each of you is wearing on you right now a hack to Navy bureaucracy, right? You're looking too low. On your chest is a name tag. The reason that's there, and it hasn't always been there, is because as Navy's got bigger, as people post around more often, it was really hard to work out who was who in the Navy, right? And in a warfighting situation, if you're fumbling around for someone's name, you're losing precious seconds that could cost lives. So that's a little hack to help a complex bureaucratic system become a better warfighting system, and so we're going to need to look for those little hacks more and more. So these administrative sort of problems we're talking about have real warfighting implications in the way we solve them.
Please.
Yes, just building on the points from my colleagues here. So I think that one of the things James, before the break, spoke about his experiences after leaving Defence and how it was a bit enlightening to look back in. It's also very different when you spent most of your career outside of Defence coming in, and you realise that it's it's a really interesting place. It's one of those, when I first started my job at BHP, it was a job for life. You could start in the mailroom, and they used to tell us about all the guys who went on to be the CEO of the company. But after some period, it changed, and they started to recruit at all levels and bring a lot of outsiders in. When BHP had a very near-death experience in the 80s and got out of the steel business, it had to reinvent itself. But interestingly, when I look at one of the great strengths of defence is that people do spend 20, 30, 40 years in the organisation, certainly in my organisation, the DST group. But also one of the weaknesses is people spend 20, 30, 40 years in my organisation, and they really accept all the norms, all the patterns of doing business which have been evolved over the time. And I think that there is a healthy exchange. I don't think we should be encouraging people to leave and other people to come in, but what we should do is encourage mobility. And we do have mobility in the defence. You guys get posted very, very often, but that's all internal mobility. External mobility, going and seeing how other businesses run, because at the end of that, some gentleman mentioned that Navy, is it a business? Where I've come from, I would say it is. And it's really, when you talk about all the problems I heard about this afternoon, they are just typical business process problems that any large organisation has and have been solved. Some solve it well, some solve it poorly, and I think we're somewhere in between. And I think we could do a lot by learning outside. Just to give you a bit of context, these problems are hard we've got. So a lot of the problems I heard about was about the IT networks and the systems, the connectivity, the bandwidth, the processes. But when we realise that the Australian Defence Force has got the biggest IT systems in the country and the most complex, with the classification levels and where we have to operate, that's extraordinary. So it means you really need good people to have that element. But you know what? We don't actually pay those people the best money to recruit, to run the biggest networks in Australia, nor do we even think about could anyone outside Australia be able to do that? Because when you've got the biggest system, the most complicated system, you really do need the best. And sometimes those best aren't from within. And we should be looking to go to other bigger organisations and say, how can you help solve these problems? And I think it's been too much of our own solutions, rather than thinking these problems have been solved elsewhere in other industries by other nations, but possibly even other navies. And let's get adopt. And innovation is about is being about a fast follower. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think that's something I'd strongly encourage people to think outside. And you can do that by some of the techniques that my colleagues were talking about, thinking outside the box and trying to be more creative or critical in your own thinking. But it's also being exposed to other ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I'm buoyed that on the panel we have just not ex-military officers, but business leaders as well. I think that's a great start for the Navy, sir. Can I ask, does anybody else have any further points I'd like to raise about the admin burden in the centre?
Ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Mike Gordon, Navigator, HMS Ballarat. Just a follow-on question with your experience in business. As James alluded to earlier, Defence Forces in general are very good at putting things in boxes, coming up with a one-size-fits-all solution and aiming for that perfect solution. I'm interested to know if in large organisations that you've worked with in the past, if they've also sought that broad, one solution to solve all the problems, or if there's a willingness to, in the context of what we've spoken about here, having one solution that works for the squadrons and then a solution that works for an MHC. And, yes, you can't, one doesn't work with the other, but it achieves the aim for each individual unit. Sure.
Well, this is the perennial challenge in any organisation, local versus corporate or global or across the organisation. Any organisation always must seek to be efficient and effective, and if you can think of one process, one piece of technology that can be implemented, it does work. But those systems are hard to implement. And I've got to say, one of the things that surprised me in defence is how poor we are at change management. It's one of the worst organisations I've seen for it. And a lot of the point is that there's no continuity of people, The whole exchange management is it's almost an art, you know, and it's well understood in the business world, and you can be done, but you've got to resource it, and you've got to plan for it, and we don't do that. Someone has an idea, let's change this thing through, and then it's not thought through, or someone says, well, that's not my problem, it's not out of scope, and then you forget the people that see that the system won't work, or then there's as well, we'll have to have a workaround, we'll just have both systems in, and then the money runs out because it was approved to be run for it, and so we have to declare success and move on. And I think it's quite it can be disheartening at times. I've seen, must say, for me personally, I've been disappointed in some of the processes we've got. And you know, I'm an IT guy, and coming into an organisation that runs on Windows 2003 is just shocker. It is. I mean, we should be at least 1 or 2 generations behind what is out there. There's always risks with the latest technology, but you should be at least running Windows 7, Windows 9, 8, those sort of platforms. And in my own organisation, we've gone through a major reinvestment process. But I think there's got to be an aspiration to be the best and to be benchmarking ourselves continually. I think that would be another way to actually almost embarrass ourselves, to say, this is where we should be, and this is where our competitors or comparative organisations are, and where do we sit below that? And then that would actually force the leaders to say, we have to improve.
Thank you, sir. We had one up the back and then down the front, please.
Yeah, good afternoon, Lieutenant Joshua Fernley. I think there's 2 that I can identify, 2 driving factors that lead to the administrative burden. One is what we've spoken about, having poor IT systems, or whether it's hardware or software. Another one is the mindset in defence, where every time we have an incident or an accident, what we tend to do is add another level of assurance, another layer, a spot check and audit, and that's really what I think consumes most of your time on a ship, that takes away from your core duties. So I don't know where that came from. I think what we're better off doing is identifying where the problem fell down and then holding those people to account, rather than just adding another level of assurance that makes people warm and fuzzy that I've done my bit to make sure it doesn't happen again. But really, that's taking away from our core duties.
Thank you, and up the front, please.
Right, g'day SIRS team. Lieutenant Dave Curl, people call me DK, working in the MCD group with Darren, the other guy here with the massive beard. On the topic of admin burden, I guess I look at it from a slightly different perspective. I think over the last few years we've talked about in the Navy, we like to do these complex group warfighting exercises. They're all warfighters. We're now maritime warfare officers instead of seaman officers. But I think we're inherently a peacetime Navy. I think there's a low appetite for risk in the Royal Australian Navy. And as a result of that, we're really worried about accountability. We're worried about, do we comply with all of this legislation, as opposed to worrying about a core role of warfighting. So I guess my question to the panel is, can we be warfighters and administrators at the same time, or should we focus on one or the other?
I can say from the US perspective, I think we have currently, I think, US Navy, emphasis is rhetorically on warfighting. But there's really very little time devoted to warfighting in terms of education, in terms of preparedness and discussion. And I think there's something fundamentally wrong with that, because being warfighter, that's a main function of the Navy, why Navy exists, to win the nation wars. That doesn't mean arguing for war. Our task, our major responsibility is deterring the war. And we can deter war as a part of the armed forces. How you deter the war? To have a most capable, best equipped, led and trained, educated force. That's the first task. If the deterrence fails, then the next step is to win the war. And I think we are too much sometimes, focused on the peacetime environment, which I don't think that is not necessary, but I think focus should be clearly on winning the war against the strongest opponent in your area, okay? And if you can do that with proper training and education, you should be able to conduct combating piracy, support of peace operations, terrorism, humanitarian assistance, all these kind of things, okay? Nobody's arguing you should not do that, But if you have a Navy which is primarily focused on Operation Short of War, that Navy cannot win the nation war. Then they actually don't have a reason to exist. Okay, and we have major problems. We are going to pay price for that one day. Okay, we agree with the Admiral. There's too much using acronyms and buzzwords are always, substitute for thinking. When you use buzzwords, you don't think. Okay, so you should really learn from the mistakes of our predecessors. Okay.
Thank you, sir. We had a question over on the side.
Hi, my name is Lieutenant Casey Cox. I'm a training systems officer based out of the Directorate of Navy Leadership and Culture Development. And following on from the administrators versus warfighting question, I put to you that we require both. I would ask you, how many of you today organised your own travel to come to this event? Can I just get you to put your hands up? Okay. So I look around the room and I look at warfighters, engineers, professionally qualified people that potentially spent half an hour, maybe even up to 2 hours organising a basic clerical task. Can those of you who found the process simple and straightforward had done that same process within the last week raise your hand? Okay, so we're increasingly being asked to do tasks like travel that we're not trained for and do all the time, which means it takes us longer to do those tasks. I would say that maybe we do need to look to the past or to the other services. Would it be worthwhile investigating, looking at clerks, such as they have in the Air Force and Army, that do those tasks and take away those sorts of roles from people who should be doing engineering or any other warfighting jobs? That's what I put to you.
It's an interesting point. Does anyone in the crowd want to comment, please?
Sexual harassment and training and things like that.
Just coming behind you there, mate.
Just curious.
Everybody, hello, I'm Nifty. I'm only a baby MWO, maybe.
Do you have a frequent training for that?
I was a RAF
See, I
clerk,
was in Finland.
and so I was trained by the Defence Force to do the paperwork for everybody else.
No training.
And I have never done more paperwork than I have as a naval officer.
You had too much because it's 3 times.
It's crazy, and it carries on from Lieutenant Cox's point, and the other warfighters or administrators. And it seems that we should, as she alluded to, check with the other services before we go checking internationally or anything like that. Air Force have their warfighters, they have their administrators, and never the twain shall cross. It's fantastic because they get stuff done. And as a Navy, as I said, I've only got very limited experience. I don't see the introduction of programs and all that kind of stuff. I just see all the extra paperwork that has to be done that just takes people away from their core responsibilities. So maybe looking at having, professional administrators instead of the occasional perso who's lurking around in some dark office would be a great idea.
Yeah. Could I just make a comment? I think it's really interesting. That's so what you're talking about here is in terms of the process. It sounds like you're doing it to yourself. But I mean, everyone here, who does their own banking now online? I mean, we used to go to the banks. Now it's all done electronically. I haven't been to a bank in years, and I do my own banking because it's really efficient and it's easy to do because the applications work. And they've been streamlined. There is no more paperwork to fill in when you do your banking. And I think we need to be thinking in that way because the business world is actually showing us how to get efficiencies and savings. And no one would think of, I'll get someone to do my banking for me. And I think but I know how hard it is to do travel inside this place and how you print off something, sign it, then you scan it and send it onto the next. I mean, it's not even electronic form. So I can appreciate that. But let's not think that these systems can't be solved through technology. They have been. The outside world's showing us that.
I was going to say, this question of admin burden. So here's how you solve that problem, right? You set up a Facebook group called the Navy Officers Who Hate Admin. Throw some of the key values in there as well, just so it looks good and people don't get too concerned. You start running diaries, quantifying how big the problem is. How many hours are you wasting? So you get some stats, you get some other people's stats. Then you've got to write it up and you've got to find the right channel to get it to the person who can make the decision to reinstate clerks or to cut away that duplicate OH&S system or to stop you having to do whatever report and return, right? So that means you've got to be able to write it up well and give them the facts they need to go and make the argument and point them in the direction. But you're going to have to do that in workaround ways and you're going to have to decide ultimately how much of your time is it really worth. And that's pretty tricky. I reckon there are probably other problems, but that's how these problems get solved. Where I work, I use Dropbox. I use a task management system called Trello. I communicate through LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, professionally email on a daily basis. You've got to do that all through the DRN at 256 kilobytes up and down. So good luck. But if you think it's a big enough problem, and I think it is a big enough problem, it's worth doing. I've got to run, but I just wanted to say before I go, if you're interested in innovative strategy, with Professor Tom Mencken from the US Naval War College, my organisation is running a retreat in early January. Flyers are here, and I look forward to hearing how you solve the problems of the OPV and training people for a new generation of skills. Thanks.
Thanks. If we could please, James, thanks very much for coming. I really appreciated your comments, particularly the part on making the effort to network. I always find that very challenging, but it is something you have to work at. And also your comments on being able to communicate your lessons learnt by being an effective writer and communicator. And I have enjoyed doing my masters and trying to learn those arts, so they're really important points for me. Thanks very much for coming, and please, thanks James for coming. Thanks very much. Yeah. Okay, so just being informed, ladies and gentlemen, we'll continue on this topic for the next 15 minutes. It's obviously very important and close to home for everybody. I think it's important to continue along probably next 15 minutes, and then we'll see which topic we're going to approach next. So please, any more comments from the crowd?
It's up to you. If you think there's some more meat on the bone on this, if you think we want to keep on this topic, then I'm happy to do that. Do you wish to do that? Great, okay. Let's move on then. Do you want to keep on going? Is he doing a good job? Keep on going. What do you want to do? Do you want to do OPV or you want to do simulation? Those for simulation, put up your hand. Those for OPV, put up your hand. OPV it is, off you go. Thank you.
A lot of people abstained from that vote. Okay, ladies and gents, I'll quickly read out the intro for OPV. The RAN will be selecting and introducing these vessels into service in a very short period of time, and the RAN has not had a similar vessel in service for several decades. The selection of bases and support methods are influenced by operational industry geography. How should the RAN use, fight, man, base and support this new capability? I'll please go to the audience first before we ask the expert panel for some comment. Are there any comments on the OPV? Over on the far side. Mike's inbound.
G'day sirs, ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Scotty McKean, HMAS Sydney. So just on the OPV, something I can see the Royal Australian Navy making a serious mistake with straight up is the old one size fits all. I can see us already trying to say, okay, we're going to buy 10 platforms, a few of them are going to be for diving, a few of them are going to be for op resolute, and a few of them are going to be for hydrography, etc. I think we need to take a serious look at the mission and seriously separate the platform from the role. So as far as hydrography is concerned, we don't really need a platform at sea. As far as we're concerned, we could really get along and kick a lot of goals with just a deployable unit, a deployable small boat, getting ahead of where the operation is and seeing what we can do. Ultimately, I'd like to see a shift in surveying as well, more on military survey. Mowing lawns up and down the patch just isn't where we need to be. So hopefully the Droggy Front punches forward with that. Also, just on the OPV manning, I was working at Norcom with Commander Watson. We successfully oversaw the TSC integration, sir. Something I'd like to see is that boarding parties become a brick, if you were, a unit capability, so that the boarding party doesn't necessarily have to come from the ship. The ship's crew can run the ship itself. The boarding party can be up and go. That boat is going to sea, right, you boarding party number one, away you go. Sir, any further comment on that?
Thanks very much. Admiral, sir, after being Board of Command.
Well, in fact, I take your point about the surveying capability, but I'll throw something back and I want comment from the engineers and other people. One of the desires is to reduce the number of different platforms and what is in those platforms in the RAN. In other words, same machinery, same auxiliary systems and all the rest of it in order to reduce. So can I have a comment from engineers about what benefit you actually think relatively will get from trying to go to a one-size-fits-all. And I did take your point about surveying as a particular problem. You know, how much is it worth having to compromise on ideals of platform suitability for an individual role? What benefits do you see?
Please.
Michael Dixon, HMA Success. I'm a pretty junior engineer, but already you can see the benefits in having a one-size-fits-all in terms of engineering. I remember a comment being made a while ago saying we have 14 major engineer manufacturers in the Navy. So just a small example, we have like Wattzilla, Peel Stick, we have Man, we have tons of different types. And if you were to keep a streamlined class that uses the same machinery, in order to keep the parts on shore, it makes maintenance easier, it makes problem identification easier, and you can also develop a cluster of engineers which know the problems susceptible to that class. So in terms of engineering perspective, I think I speak on a lot of the cohort as well, that it is a huge advantage to keep the continuous class going with the same amount of machinery.
Plenty of comments. In the front here, please.
Hi, Alicia Harrison, HMAS Broome. So my opinion on OPVs might be particularly relevant. The issue with OPVs, particularly in a resolute space, is that they're not going to be actually effective in a lot of the area that you're going to be operating in as part of resolute. They're going to be significantly larger. I've just spent the last 3 weeks on HMAS Broome conducting patrols in the Torres Strait. A lot of that area Armadales can't get into, so an OPV is certainly not going to be able to get into. To resolve that, one of the suggestions that we came up with was to now start developing a really close relationship with customs. They've got the Cape classes there. We're starting to use them ourselves to integrate that cooperation. While I was on that patrol in the Torres Strait, there was a Cape class, an Armadale, and a Papua New Guinean patrol boat patrolling the same area at the same time. Now, we deconflicted ourselves, but that shouldn't be up to us. That should be at a command level, making that deconfliction through the cooperation, and therefore the OPV can be employed correctly to achieve its mission and meet its absolute mission capability, rather than being wasted overlapping spaces that it can't operate where there's better assets for it. As for the manning, so at the moment we've also gone into the single crewing system. It's not working. However, give it another 12 months and it will. What the problem we have now is the problem you're going to have with OPVs is that you don't have people coming to Darwin. You don't have people coming, well, you have a lot of people wanting to go to Cairns, but no one wants to leave Cairns. So that you don't have that rollover, you don't have that turnaround for people. So you can put as many pretty boats as you like up in Darwin, up in that remote areas, you're still not going to get the people coming. So you need to look at the conditions that these people are getting. One of the biggest thrills people on patrol boats have is actually doing part of the boarding party stuff. So if you remove that from the manning, from their qualifications, that takes away one extra thing that's kind of a perk for them to come up there in the first place for. So that's something to consider as well. There's a lot of civilian accreditations, there's something should be looked to for the manning. It's all going to be about getting people actually up there, because you're going to need more people as well. Just some other things that we need to think about.
Thank you, ma'am. It's great that now we've started talking about warfighting, we're all innovating, which is great. Just come here, please.
Lauren Aikens, A16 Squadron. I put it to everyone, is naval aviation capability critical in the maritime domain? And can naval aviation capability maybe get to some of the spots that a larger vessel might not be able to?
Over here, please. So, Mike. Oh, sorry, did you have a comment, Mike?
Just Wayne Langworthy again. I was just commenting on the Admiral's, when he put it out to the engineers, just purely with running the same platform, just as we do in aviation a lot, it's the configuration management and the market share that you have with maintaining that, just responding to that question.
Lieutenant Commander Hudson, a lot of what it comes down to is what you actually want the OPV to do, and I think that needs to be defined by senior leadership first. If they want it to do all three roles, it's going to be a very difficult cat to skin. But if we're talking about aviation with OPV in a majority patrol role, there's a lot of good work with UAVs being done at the moment. I'm pretty sure Scan Eagle can be launched from a pretty decent sized rib. There'd be no reason I could see that OPV couldn't have a detachment on board with UAVs, which increases your over-the-horizon scanning You can increase the size of the ribs on board to 12 metre as opposed to 7, which increases their seagoing capability. And then you can skin the hydro and MCM world, which are a lot more common and have a lot more things in common in terms of how they do business, separate to the patrol issue, which might make it easier to achieve.
Thank you. To Dr. Vego, I was wondering if you had any comments from the USN that do try and multi-role their vessels as an experience. No. All right, we'll go back to the crowd then, please.
Lieutenant Commander Chris Mills at Watson. I spent 3 years in the US, not involved in the LCS program, but a lot of my close friends and shipmates were involved in the LCS program. It's a mess, regardless of what the press or big navies say about it. And the big problem they've got is trying to get multi-mission platforms or multi-roles out of one platform. They tried to adjust the engineering solution there. Originally it was build 2 prototypes and then choose one. They've continued to build both prototypes. The mission equipment for those mission sets, the hydro, the air warfare, the MCM, and those sorts of mission equipments don't work well, and they have trouble integrating it. And then the other part of the system is the people part, is the taking an MCM crew off a hull and replacing it at 5 minutes notice with an ASW or an air warfare crew, and you lose that consistency. You end up with a problem of the multi-crew we've had in the Armadale, where I just hand over a boat. I don't know what its problem was last week because I only just got here. So they're starting to suffer from those sorts of problems as well. And they'll likely go, from what I'm being told, go away from multi-crew, and boats within those squadrons will be designated to specific roles. And part of the unique problem I have, especially with MCM, a steel-hulled OPV, I don't want to put that in a mine-type environment. That's why we've got fiberglass, Huon class mine hunters at this stage. I don't want to use a fiberglass hull on a long-range, deep ocean patrol vessel where we're having problems using an aluminium hull to do that right now. Now, there's significant difficulties with trying to get one size fits all. Looking around at what our compatriots and other big navies are doing, it's a struggle, and it's something that's probably not going to be easily achieved, especially in the timeline where we've taken a very optimistic view that we're going to cut steel. We've already made the decision to make it out of steel, apparently, in 3 years' time.
Testing 1, 2. Just quickly, then the question is, if it's so apparent, then why do we pursue it? Is that a question? Is that a reasonable question in your view? If it's listening to what you have to say, to you it's so apparent that the success is limited, then the question would have to be, or beg to be asked, then why do we pursue it? Is that in the back of your mind, therefore?
So, with the LCS program, and from what I'd read and what my compatriots in the States have told me, they were looking to rationalise a number of platforms, including Oliver Hazard Perry down, to address some of the same issues that we're talking about right now. Engineering, capability, manning, all sorts of things. To increase that capacity and days on station, those sorts of same issues that we deal with. I'm not sure that it is apparent. I haven't seen specifics as to what this OPV is supposed to do. I would think it's not going to do inshore patrol. I think the Armadale and the next generation Armadale will probably do that. I would think it is apparent it should be air capable. If it was up to me, it would be air capable. It would probably be drone capable. But I don't think there's any apparence there. I think what are the absolute needs, capability list, what are the absolute tasks that this vessel needs to take on, and then we can examine within budget what we can purchase or build, develop to take care of the most number of those solutions. We're not going to be able to get one platform that does every potential role. It's just not possible. Otherwise, we'd already have it. In building something, is 80% good enough? It might need to be, because if getting that final 20% means that the project budget quadruples or doubles at least, maybe it's not worth investing the time and money in trying to develop that perfect solution. So maybe an LCS program that gets 80% of the job done is good enough for the money that we can afford. We see the same thing with the submarines, I think. We want submarines that can do everything, but we only want to pay $1 billion each for it. You know, when you're developing capability, maybe it's a case of what capability can you actually afford, and then make a list of priorities and rule a line at that 80% mark, which meets your budget, and say, these are the needs to have, and anything else after that is nice to have.
Thank you. Alex.
Okay, well, thank you. That's a very good discussion there, and some points made about the OPV. I think that there's what we're hearing here is, you know, what are the real requirements for this particular vessel. But in fact, this is one of the challenges you have in working in the Department of Defence, is that there are other priorities for governments. You know, it's to pay for things, and there's you know, fit within a budget, but then there's also the imperatives of, you know, saving jobs in shipyards. That is actually a strong case, and that timeline of cutting steel has come from decisions made from government. So governments make decisions. It's up to the department to, you know, implement them. And I think one of the challenges you've talked about is, I don't think that the requirements have been fully thought through. I think this is where you can go back to the sort of, you know, first principles, in the sense of what are the scenarios that these vessels will operate in, okay? And look for an evidence-based approach, your experiences of other countries operating. That's the first thing to do in an evidence-based approach. But also, I would advocate that you should be doing good operations analysis and simulation, and what roles can be you know, multi-rolled more effectively than others. And I think this is the role where innovation comes in, because, you know, if we never innovated, we'd always have the same vessels. The vessels would never change. They'd always be the same. So we've got to somehow spiral develop. So at times a challenging timeline, 2017, can actually force us to think. But we've got to think critically. We've got to actually analyse the situation, etc. I think that where we've moved with this particular platform is really been thrust by government decision making, and naval officers, capability development people haven't had the full opportunity to have this kind of debate we're having here. But I certainly think its debate is beginning. So this is a time for everyone to step up and saying, let's go through and have a real critical discussion like we're having here, and get to the point and start to do the things that can have an evidence-based discussion rather than opinion-based. So thank you.
Up the back, man.
I'd just like to pick up where the previous speaker was discussing. So with our concepts of mine warfare, I'd like to champion that side of the sphere of warfare. So the concepts haven't changed. We still conduct mine warfare from a fiberglass hull. We still have controlled submersibles being sent off those vessels. The future is exciting for mine warfare, but the doctrine hasn't changed. So within that sphere, we do have UAVs coming on. We have synthetic aperture sonars coming on. We also have hyperspectral analysis, all coming from DSG. But they're not going to be ready by 2017, so they shouldn't shape the direction of the platform from an MCM perspective until we have some clear and concise direction there to then make that decision.
Thanks, mate. Another point over here, please.
Yeah, Lieutenant Hales off HMAS Shepparton. I'm just wondering why we couldn't go down a path of variants where we have the same sort of vessel, but it has a variant that's optimised towards the task passage. So you have commonality between the vessels, but you have a boat that can go 34 knots, or you have a boat that's plastic and goes 6 knots and can do your other sort of areas.
Please, up front.
My one was really commonality of the platform itself. So I'm on HMAS Sydney at the moment. One of our big tasks is to provide the fleet 72 MSTs by the 11th of December. So we're trying to fill the void, not for FFGs, because we don't need 72 MSTs for FFGs. It's to fill the void for the LHDs, the MHCs, and so on. So when Admiral Goldrick was talking about commonality of platforms, I'm now training 72 MSTs with FFG experience and FFG systems. They're going to have to go to an FFH and redo their whole task book again to relearn your systems. So when we talk about that commonality, it's the ability to train someone, so I can grab the MST that's on Sydney today and chuck him on the MST for whichever ship we need that's going to be on the OPV. Likewise, we can move people around. So we need to, I guess, in some ways, separate the warfighting side of it to the sustainment and engineering capacity of this platform. The other one that goes with this is sustainability and the supply side of it. So the classic example is I'm going to have 10 different generators because I've got 10 different types of platforms. Okay? Where do I store them strategically throughout Australia to get those to a ship that needs it? So a classic for this has been Resolute. Resolutes provide a lot of these sorts of complex challenges. When I was working at MAROPS, I was required to organise strat lift so I could get a certain type of rib to Christmas Island in a C-17 to destroy part of the runway, which I wasn't meant to do. When I had other ships in the area that were leaving, but because the 7.2 metre rib on that vessel is a different variant and the way the hooking mechanism works, I can't transfer that to the other vessel. So I've now just spent in excess of $40,000 in fuel just for the plane. I've wasted God knows how many hours, man hours to do that, just to move one rib. And that led to actually having to have a supply depot at Christmas Island with ribs and one full-time supply officer. Okay. Likewise for this, when we did it with the aircraft, we got the MH90. Again, commonality of our platforms, we have usually been running S70 Bravos, which work really well with the 7th Fleet, considering they all use S70 Bravos or a similar variant. So when a fuel pump breaks on an S70 Bravo, which it did, I could actually get that manufactured on the aircraft carrier, and they would then fly that part to us. However, when the MRH-90 broke down in Pacific Partnership, guess what? Couldn't get a part. It was stuck on Tobruk for ages, and we couldn't move it. So the commonality and sustainment side of the ship goes past just the single platform, but across the whole fleet, and where we can actually locate these parts to get them to the ships, with costing us the minimum amount of money and the minimum amount of manning burden with that. So,
thanks. Very good point there to bring the argument full circle from warfighter engineering and logistics, which hasn't been brought up so far. In the middle, please.
Got a question specifically for Admiral Goldrick. In your experience as a previous Commander Border Protection Command, a lot of the assumptions, I think the conversation we're having here at the moment is that the OPV is going to replace the job that the Armidel's doing, i.e. on the line. We've all spent time on the line, some more than others. Should we be there? Should we be conducting what is a constabulary role? I mean, what's our job? To fight and win at sea? And I think your statement earlier about this decision being forced on us may be preventing us having this discussion, but should we be on the line, or should we be focusing on fighting and winning at sea and spending a bit more time looking at the more interesting arena that's developing to our north?
Focus isn't the right word. It's actually balance of effort. Is it part of our job? Yes. Constabulary, diplomatic, military. The foundation is military, but we do constabulary. Navies have always done constabulary. Now, it's balance. Do I think that probably too many naval resources are being devoted to the border protection when it would be more in the national interest to bring in additional resources onto the civil side, to provide additional hulls in the north to free up naval capability? And I'm not talking about patrol boats, I'm actually talking about the bigger ships. Yes. But should we be doing that as part of our existence? You bet. And by the way, I can tell you one of the problems I think the Royal Navy has at the moment is that they got out of their what was called offshore tapestry game, reduced their domestic maritime security effort in a well-meant shift to help Iraq and Afghanistan, and actually developed relevance deprivation syndrome, which has not happened for the Navy. because it's a mechanism of keeping the Navy in the national understanding that actually it matters. But is there a problem of balance? Yeah, I agree there is, and I think resources need to move from the border security role to warfighting, but other resources, which may actually be less money, you know, in national terms, and even less people, need to be brought in on the civil side. But, you know, fundamentally, constabulary is a role of navies. The only navy that's not done it is the United States Navy, and in my view, it's not a complete navy because it delegates to the Coast Guard. Far too much, in my view. It's part of our job. So balance rather than focus.
Darren, I'm going to let you go at this stage. Thank Darren for a great job. Thanks, mate. I'm just mindful of the time, and we were due to finish here at 1700, but clearly I think that's too much time. So what I'd like to do before I ask the panel for a few final comments is that I'm concerned that we haven't heard much from the submariners. So might I invite some comments with regards to the innovation spheres from our submariners. Thanks very much.
Hi, it's Lieutenant Commander Flynn from Sub 4. I would say for everybody who raised the issue about broadband and Wi-Fi, you need to actually fundamentally look at what your technology is doing for you and whether or not you're actually overburdening yourselves. So we go to sea, there is no email, there's no mobile phones, our data is captured on a 3.5-inch floppy disk, and that's how we transfer data. All of us who go to sea, we also watch keep for 12 hours a day. And then we get our admin done outside of that. And we cope with it. So every time you send an email, think about who you are CCing. Does that person need to see it? Okay. Every time you send a signal, why? If there are 15 people looking at a log rec before it goes to the ComSem for release, that is too many hands getting into the pie. Okay. There's one person that does a log rec on the boat, it's the COB. That's it. Okay, so you need to actually look at, do you actually have an admin burden, or are you creating it? Okay, if you go to sea, look at your signals in the morning, then shut down Mercury. Look at your emails in the morning, shut down Outlook, and get on with your jobs. Because that's what we do on submarines. We don't look at that for 12 hours a day and then think we've got an admin overload. Because it isn't there, some of you are actually creating it for yourselves.
Next submariner. I know there's some heaps there. Righto, off you go, champion.
Afternoon, sir. Lieutenant Commander Stefan Zohar from Subops, Submariner Warfare Officer. So, having tried to implement a few innovative changes over the years in the submarine force, they seem to have a lot of momentum at the junior levels, at this level, and then they get stopped somewhere. And looking at the same problem, I mean, I could go back to a number of the boats and see changes that I've tried to implement actually go backwards. How do we get over the hurdle that is at the management level above where we are? So, I'm trying to put this question back to the panel, sir.
Okay. I'll answer it because I think I can fairly answer it. You've got to hold your seniors to account. I'm not saying you're going to get up in the room and say, you know, I mean, here I feel my past will catch up with me. I'm not saying get up in public and say, and what about, you know, that you said you do, but you have to hold people to account. Close the door and say, we need to talk. Sir, ma'am. You know, have the conversation. Often there is actually a really good reason. And somebody like the Chief of Navy, for instance, and again can have a private conversation with you, which you actually might end up having to, you know, treat as privileged, may actually be under intense political pressure, or maybe under intense pressure within the resource allocation within the department, you know, because there's never enough for what everybody wants, and he simply, you know, can't get sufficient to do something. So he or she has had to make a very difficult decision to accept, you know, that they can't do that. and to come back and tell you. But they might, they might not be able to make public why the full context. So hold your senior to account and have that conversation. And you will actually start to learn about limits. Just as you've, no matter how junior you are, I know you already have had to tell your troops, there's a limit to this, or we can't do that, or we're constrained by this. Well, that's what the senior people are living with all the time. Now, they might have actually got that balance of how they've decided to do things or not do things or stop doing things wrong. Okay, they are fallible. And the fact that you're coming back at them might actually add something, a piece of evidence or a critical thing that they weren't aware of. For instance, the story of the C-17 and damaging the runway. Now, one of the interesting debates at the moment is how much we invest in recapitalising Christmas and Cocos. Interesting story about why we needed to get a C-17 in there quickly. Might we need to do it again? So if you have that conversation, you might get it fixed again. If not, you might well get a reasonable explanation of why, in fact, it can't happen. But I suppose what I'm saying is don't go quiet into that good night. And the quiet conversation with the door closed can achieve an enormous amount. And Alex, you're a Chief Defence Scientist, you're working at that level all the time. I think you can comment.
Thanks for that. No, actually, I think it goes back to those comments I made about change management. And there are good ways to get change management done. It's like really building that consensus. Like you said, there's a consensus at the groundswell at the being. There's a great idea, and then you've got to really get the buy-in from the management and get it documented and get it put into some sort of framework, whereas we're reporting back on it, and it's in a traffic light sense, it starts to go red, and the people have to own it, and someone's accountable for that deliverable, because what we have in defence too often is everybody and no one is accountable for the deliverable of particularly change processes. And I think that's one thing we've been trying to do in my own organisation, is to have these publishable change programs, and we report back on them and publish what we've done well and what we've done poorly. And people starting to believe, and we survey our staff again to say, well, what do you think? Are we doing these things? And slowly the buy-in has come. But as the Admiral was saying, that there are constraints on resourcing and we can't do things. But that means leaders have to be honest and communicate, this cannot be done, but this can be done, and I commit to do it, and we will do it.
Nick, I'm wondering whether, in fact, the CN's Navy Innovation Statement should have really read Navy Innovation and Leadership Statement. I'm wondering whether that word in itself is lacking in there. Next question.
Hi, sir. Sorry, just to go back to what Sir was saying before. I think we got a bit diverted before with ICT, maybe because I'm a bit bitter and we all are, but we were blaming the ICT. What I was actually saying, what was echoed when we were talking outside, is that often the systems need to adapt to what we have. We're never going to have Mastus on patrol boats that weighs like a ton. And as one of the comm staff who's here today reminded me, it costs $4 million to install and fit. And what Sir was saying about how they adapt on submarines, as much as we all like to pretend that we're all exactly the same, everyone knows the submarines do it differently, and quite often they do it better. We all have had that sailor who's wanted to change the submarines before, and we've said, if you want to get this going quickly, ring the submariners, because when they want something done, it happens straight away. So if there's a way that submariners are getting it done, where they wake up in the morning, look at Mercury, turning it off and not doing it again, and they're not having to log 8 Sentinel reports a day, maybe we should start looking internally inside Navy, especially into the other specialist corps like submarines or MCD, to see if there's a way that they're doing it which we could adapt to as well. Thanks.
Right. Is there anyone out there that hasn't asked a question or made a statement that it's just dying to do so? And I invite that it doesn't necessarily have to be related specifically to the topics that we've just raised. You've got a couple of minutes left. Right.
So I was just wondering, based on the innovation statement, what are the measurables? What are we looking at in 5 years' time that innovation is going to have brought into the Navy? I think there's a lot of, I hate to be a devil's advocate, but we have to be we've got unrealistic expectations that we can innovate our Navy to something that's great and beyond what we've got now. We've got restrictions within our financial situation. We've got government has to provide jobs to certain industries within Australia. I think that we need to have a clear goal with regards to the innovation. What's the end point? Are we just going to talk about this for 5 years? What was the end point today, sir? Will the Chief of Navy be happy with the outcome today? I don't know. Do people feel with the motivation that they had at the start of the day, do they feel like they've achieved it today in the last few hours? I think maybe a little bit more time and effort needs to be put into maybe smaller groups, to having different people from different organisations, different sailors, come together and spend time in a smaller environment with, not with questions that are a paragraph long. We need to look at defined goals. We need to define our goals and we need to achieve those in the most logical process.
All right, thank you. Let's just go to this question then. I'm going to ask, and I'm not going to shirk it, because I'm just going to ask the project director to give me his views on behalf of the Chief of Navy. But before I get to your question, that was in fact one of the specific aims and goals and the challenges that we had as to when we look at the question here of what, so what, and now what. We're now into the now what, all right? Let's just hear quickly from the project director. We go to this question and I'd invite, I don't have all the answers, in fact I have no answers, all right? I'm privileged to facilitate some of the smart observations and views here, and I'd invite actually one of you to answer or to give a view with regards to your observation. Nick, can you just touch first of all on the so what part of this exercise? Thank you.
No, thanks, sir. That's a very good question. You'll see from the innovation statement, CN is concerned about achieving the aims of Pelorus. It's quite ambitious, what Pelorus is really talking about. Obviously, there's some factors there that may be out of control, particularly with delays to AWDs and a few other items. So what he's talking about in the innovation statement is using all means necessary to succeed with Pelorus. So probably a good way to frame this is to read the Pelorus statement again and the 4 objectives of Pelorus. And you'll see that this is not just about platforms. The 3rd objective on workforce, there's a significant amount of work on workforce that can be done. And in some ways, that's probably an easier one than some of those platform issues. There's things the Navy can do with the way it manages its people, organises the people, that can be done in that time frame. And there's a lot of innovation that can be used, and such as some of the suggestions made today. So this innovation statement's really focused at succeeding in 3 years' time with Pelorus, and organising the APVs is part of that because they need to be organised by the Pelorus due date of 2018. The way today has been structured, I suppose look at it as a starting point. It was formatted to make the most out of the panel that we had here at the CPOW conference, and to provide junior leaders with a good chance to say what they think about a number of important matters. Your question on where does it go though is partly answered by the innovation seminars that Navy will be starting soon. So please, if you have a good idea and you are interested, stay behind at the end of this and volunteer for the innovation seminar. Now that's just a starting process for that, but that will help you with pushing your innovative ideas and will allow you some mechanisms to push a particular idea you may have, as well as giving opportunity for people to teach you a little bit about success in innovation. And we actually have a lieutenant in the Navy who ran an innovation company for a number of years and worked in industry, who has re-entered the Navy and is helping with that seminar. So you're going to get some very good industry advice. So in a way, that's an innovative way of approaching innovation. I hope that's provided somewhat of an answer for you. Yeah. No, it's a very good question, and we get asked this a lot. And the feedback on Plan Pelorus, a lot of the feedback on Plan Pelorus was, okay, we understand you want us to innovate, but how are we going to do it? Where are the extra resources we need to innovate? And it's a really good question. And I don't think that they have all the answers on that one. I think one of the topics touched today is that industry faces the same problem. Companies might have a bit more freedom, but they certainly have limited resources, and they have shareholders to answer to. So they managed to do it reasonably economically. So I think that's probably one of the messages we need to think about.
All right, thank you. I'm just going to now invite the panel. Look, unfortunately, go ahead, very, very briefly, because I know you guys want to get out, and we've got a closing ceremony to attend. Off you go. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Very briefly.
Training and simulation hasn't been brought up here, so
Yep.
I'd just like to touch on that quickly.
Go ahead.
Synthetic training, if done well, is more realistic than live training in a maritime environment. We can't really replicate the next maritime battlefield in the EAXA using Pell Air, Learjets, doing subsonic speeds, trying to replicate supersonic missiles and the like. So simulation we've been doing it for some time. It is a growth area, so everyone needs to get on board with it because it's coming, and in the very near future, most of our training should be synthetic, as it's the only way we can replicate the next battlefield.
Thanks. I don't disagree, having been a gunner officer for 25 years. Could I ask Alex and Admiral Goldrick and Dr. Vego just to provide a brief couple of minutes summary of your observations today and any final points or guidance or indeed some advice for us. Thank you, Alex.
Okay, thank you. Well, look, I don't know if I can give any advice, but to me it's also been a learning experience to hear about how you view things and I want to reassure you that at the end of the day, it's what I said, I think, is at Boeing they find a way, and I think you've got to not lose that sight, because it's a great organisation, and you must find a way. And I think that on the other point, I just want to reinforce, just on the last point was made by the program managers, that you do need resource programs for success. Even though they're, and it doesn't have to, and the resourcing can be modest, and it's usually people's time, and then there may be some travel budgets or some money to build a prototype or to show a particular method is viable. So I think resourcing is important, but it can be done. But the other point is to document these things, put them out there in lights, and get the leadership team to stand behind what you're going to do. If it's great to have an innovation statement, which is really good, and then have these seminars, but what things will we change in defence, and get behind those and actually go for them, but and seek to take those ideas from anywhere. And I think the other thing, my only point is that the only disturbing kind of comment I had was, which goes back into my own organisation. So I've got scientists, scientists talking about doing admin, and really or administration, and they're being managers. But I just think that everyone in an organisation should seek to be a leader, and leaders do both things. They get in there, roll their sleeves up, do the work, but also have to do those other support things that we all need to contribute to. But nevertheless, I think you guys here and gals are the future of the Navy. I wish you well, and please keep thinking about how we can innovate, because we have got such a fantastic future in terms of, even though we can't have all the platforms we want, we're going to get a fantastic, capable force, and it will require your efforts to make it as capable as it can be. So thank you.
I think I'll just close by telling a story of innovation, and it's to do with a young lieutenant commander, not me, who was running our tactical development cell back in 1988 and 1989. And he did some extraordinary things, but amongst that was working with DSTO to start the experiments and the trials and the examination of the fact that we had the wrong, paint scheme for our ships. We knew that in 1988 and 89. It was not the ideal. And he started the trials to actually get better schemes that used new paint technology in different shades. Those trials then took place over the next few years, and as he went up in the ranks, he continued to actually push and to overcome one conservatism. And I said, we've seen the enemy and here's us. I just heard a couple of indications in this audience that there's a bit of it there. And also, people say, oh, it'll be too expensive. Finally, of course, the last Chief of Navy took the decision to change. And of course, the first ANZAC is out with the new grey scheme, with all the advantages and benefits. And of course, Vice Admiral Peter Jones retired last year. When I saw the photograph of the first ANZAC, I was able to ring him up and say, "Congratulations, Peter, well done. It took you all that time, and at least we have a ship in the right colour and you're not yet dead."
I have only just a few concluding thoughts, about the topic today, the creativity, innovation. It doesn't come sometimes naturally, it has to be developed, and I think major role play really leadership to provide an environment for free inquiry and for constructive criticism. Otherwise, the organization is going to die. I mean, the organization cannot exist without free exchange of ideas. I think critical thinking is the key ingredient for creativity and innovation. You must read, and my general observation of not only, certainly I don't know Australian Navy, but I know a lot of other navies that neglect of study of history, especially military naval history by naval officers, I think is one of the really a great problem for many navies. There is a difference between student of history and historian. You don't need to be historian. You don't need PhD in history, but you should have an interest in studying. And knowledge doesn't come from internet. It comes really from reading and reflecting. You should also write when it's possible, because writing makes you more precise in your thoughts. And there is no contradiction between thinkers, being thinker, and being practitioner. Okay? So that's my concluding thought on that.
Thank you, Alana. Just going back to your comment too, mate. We actually had, and when we were preparing for the seminar as part of the CPOWER conference, we invited your comments. We actually got 58, nearly 60 pages of comments. So for those of you in the audience that had made a contribution, who'd written down their thoughts, thank you very much. That will be going straight to Commodore Watson, bound up, and I've asked, I've in fact invited Cian to read them directly without any pen amendments or anyone else mucking around with them or providing an administrative look at it before it goes to the Chief of Navy, and I think he's looking forward to reading that. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the Young Leaders Strategic Forum. I would sincerely like to thank on your behalf our three panellists, Dr. Alex Zelinsky, Rear Admiral James Goldrick, and Milana Vego. Thank you very much.